Good morning, everyone. We're honored to host one of the most influential contemporary artists of our time, Luc Tuymans. Known for his distinctive style and his ability to merge historical, political, and cultural narratives, Tuymans has redefined what painting means in the 21st century. He will be in conversation with Ory Dessau, curator of the current exhibition Out of This World. Today's artist talk is a unique opportunity to hear directly from Tuymans as he shares insights into his creative process and his perspectives on art in today's cultural landscape. Whether you're an artist, an art lover, or simply curious about the intersections of art and society, I am certain you will walk away enriched by his words. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Stichting Andries van Lauwe, our partners in education, for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank all of you, our audience, for supporting us and being part of this special occasion. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Luc Tuymans and Ory Dessau.
Thank you, Goedele, Christine. Thank you, Luc, for your participation and for your willingness to do this talk. We are talking about a work from 2007, which we present here in this PowerPoint presentation as one of your wall paintings, murals. But somehow I think this work is distinguished from the rest of the group. Each work is unique in its own way, of course, because here we speak about painting installation, total installation, originally shown in the Cabinet for Aktuelle Kunst in 2007. Yeah, I think it even takes, maybe it's even the first time that the frame, in this case, the frame of the glass pane of the space, but nevertheless, maybe also the frame of the stretcher, the frame of the drawing, but also the glass pane plays a role. The glass pane of the drawing, also light and shadow play a role in this work, and also even you make the picture plane into a figure in this work. So maybe you want to elaborate in your words about this work before we delve into the vast range of works we have in front of us?
Yeah, well, the very first show I did in the Kunstkabinet in Bremerhaven was in 1993, which was with paintings. Mm-hmm. And the second one was in 2007, as you said. And the idea was to make something really specific for this space, basically, which is actually a shop space. And which you could only kind of apprehend when you would stand in front of the shop window.
Outside the space.
From outside. You were not actually allowed to go into the space because then you would damage the installation, so to speak. So I talked with, it was then already Maurits Wessler, to put, because the floor were like yellow tiles, to put linoleum on the tiles, and then in my studio I mixed a color which was somewhat grayish, like white grayish, and then actually I went there with my assistant, and then with just rope we made this, because we made this maquette first, which you can see here, and the drawing and all that. And then we made these lines, and then actually just with a brush and white paint, we painted it.
So you painted the light that is refracted through the glass pane?
Well, the supposed light, because that was not the real light. That
exactly, it was all artificial, but it imitated the light refracting through.
And it was really funny, because I was kind of afraid if it would really work, but it actually worked. It was like you were painting light when I was actually doing it, which was kind of crazy. And during the day, it looked like a real shadow. During the night, of course, it was completely different. And because there was also a point where they did in the MMK, they did a whole retrospective about all the shows in the Kunstkabinet in Bremerhaven, and they asked me to reenact it, which I refused. because I thought it was inappropriate and it became too much of a gimmick, and it lost actually the magic that it had there, and I wanted to keep that as a memory as that. So the whole idea of this specific project came not because of Blinky Palermo, because Blinky Palermo also made the wall painting of the exact size of the window of
a little bit smaller
Kunstkabinet in Bremerhaven. It was actually based upon one of the later, paintings of Edward Hopper, which is like sunlight in an empty room.
Yes.
And it was this idea of transpositioning this idea into a 3D experience nearly, in a very minimal way.
In a way, you recreate, you fabricate the angle of the sunlight at a certain moment of the day. This idea of stopping time was important for you in this work?
Yeah, that was it, and of course it was also extremely stupid. So that's what I also liked about it, because it was very simple, simple and very effective.
Yes.
So in that sense, I think it always worked in the sense. I also gave it a very specific title, which means ENDE, which means the end.
Yes. Do you want? I was thinking why, because I was trying to think why ENDE. So ENDE because the light ends, because there is no source of light anymore.
Because that, and there's also the idea of the transformation of the space, but also transformation in time, and then of course the element of the twilight zone. Also, we can say the end of a life, or all those things that are encompassed, which then of course referred back to the painting of Hopper, because I think a year later he died.
It's one of his end paintings, so to speak. It's one of his end paintings.
Yeah, not the last one, but I think to the second or the third one.
But it's true, I think it's great you mentioned Blinky Palermo, because unlike Blinky Palermo, who really repeated, in a way, in a sort of an idiom of site-specific intervention, you repeated the architecture of the space in a distorted way, because the shadow you fabricated was extending in a distorted silhouette from the floor onto the right wall.
Yes, and also it's my old fascination with shadows. If you want to paint a shadow, the color of a shadow is like something so nondescript. And so difficult, because it has this immaterial quality, in a sense, that this fascination stayed with me, and so. And
frames, if I try to think, to conjure, if you have paintings that make the frame of the painting into a figure of the painting, I can, the immediate example I can give is Antechamber from 85. You paint a picture inside the picture, like you refer to the frame inside the work? Is it a recurrent motif in your work? Or it's just always this idea of... No, yes, sure, there is a link. But the painting you mentioned, the Antechambre, was based upon the enlargement of a drawing, which was really interesting for me to do that, because it's very difficult to enlarge a drawing, because there's a huge difference between a drawn line and a painted line, basically. And that was also a little bit the case in this situation. For me, it's an empty space, first and foremost, and it's about absence, it's about void, and in this sense, it can also connect to many other works by you that focus on the empty space, the empty room, from the gas chamber until your last solo show at Zeno X in 2020, the empty stage. The numbers. The numbers, of course, the idea of the void space of the numbers coming from the behind of the painting, so to speak, almost. Do you have a fascination with empty spaces, with the idea? Because empty spaces, for me, they create anticipation. They create always this kind of... That's exactly so, I think. I think empty spaces just give you the possibility to, from an imaginative point of view, just to, first of all, you can fill it in, that's one thing. Secondly, you could always think about
particular situation that took place or didn't take place. So it's before, after. It of course has a huge link with an after image in a sense also. In that sense also is linked to the idea of how you memorize things. And well, with the gas chamber, of course, that's very self-evident.
Exactly.
Just in the sense that you don't show actually the horror in the sense of corpses, but you just show the empty space, which in effect was a mass space at the time that it was in use.
Yes. The second show I saw at MDD was Absence is the highest form of presence. So in a way I try to think about the role absence plays in your work, the role of the void. I try to see connections between the work we show here to this show from 2009, which somehow defined a moment in art, a moment of depletion, a moment of emptiness. Is it things you relate to?
Yeah, mostly, of course, the idea is that I always made a point that my paintings should not remind you of any sort of sounds, let alone music. So
you are not Kandinsky.
No, they shouldn't. I mean, they should be muted. They should be completely silenced. And the muteness is a different sound, basically. So that's the idea of the specificity of the idea of absence or the void, which in itself is void, but isn't void in itself. I mean, because it is actually a space in
very loaded.
an in-between space, so to speak. And with the ENDE piece, that was pretty predominant.
Yes.
And it was really given in by this space itself and its history also, because most of the, I mean, especially when Jürgen Wessler, who initiated the space, started with it in the 60s, he actually gave the same budget to every artist, and the catalog was actually him with a tripod at night through the window making the photograph, which is really interesting, and it had a huge impact for a one-man operation, so to speak. And I think that was also important to have that type of simplicity then to honor that specific situation.
And we show here the maquette, the preparatory maquette, and the sketch that preceded the work. We try to recreate the angle that you presume in the painting of the light coming out as if from outside. And we also show a series of Polaroids that you took after the fact.
Yeah, the Polaroids were all made and then turned into a publication. I had a conversation with Udo Kittelman. And that interview is in the file. Do you still have the publication?
Yes, we even.
And then the Polaroids were sold in support for the Kunstkabinet in Bremerhaven.
And I'm trying to think about the whole ensemble we try to orchestrate here. Somehow the two points in the axis of Groveno and Palermo, seeking a way to as minimalists, who more, who less, to combine between some kind of the heritage of abstract art with the notion of the ready-made. Groveno is doing it. We can elaborate later how he does it. But Palermo, as some kind of foundational statement of this ensemble of a presentation, he tries to find manifestations in the world that can serve as painting, and then he elevates them, incorporates them into his own work, and by that somehow reflects his awareness to the ready-made. But in a way, also Palermo is somehow the conclusion of something. We can think of as a subsequent reaction to Palermo about Günter Fogg or about Heimo Zobernig. But I was thinking that in a way you took it a step forward, because the way you incorporate the ready-made, the shift between the object ready-made into the image ready-made, and the idea of trying, Palermo also in the bottom line, he tries to retrieve painting, he tries to do painting.
Yeah, but I think Palermo was probably extremely interested, as I am still, by Russian constructivism to begin with.
Yes.
You have Malevich, Barnett Newman, all those things must have played out in a sense.
Of course.
And in a sense, if you look at this work, unfortunately he died very young.
Yes.
But it was, in a very weird way, it had his, of course, links with minimalism for sure, but there was an element of playfulness and distortion in the work, which
Absolutely.
would have played out probably differently if he would have lived longer. So there is surely a very pictorial element
Yeah.
in the way he uses color, the way he uses the shape, and the size of things, which is important for a German, to use the right size. So in that sense, it was kind of an oddity in the situation coming out of the class of Joseph Beuys, which is a completely different anthem to think of.
But in your early considerations, the milieu of Palermo, or the proposition of Palermo as somebody who is,
I think there was something rebellious in Palermo's, which is kind of restrained at the same time, but it was very decisive and self-conscious.
Yes.
That, from an early age, he made
Absolutely.
kind of decisive work in a very strange way. And so, yeah.
Maybe I ask you now, as the curator of the exhibition, The Gap, in 2015, that somehow tried to tell a story of abstraction within the Belgian context, but maybe Palermo was somehow the missing link that connected younger examples from the show.
Yeah, but this was a Belgium show, so I mean, and it was asked by Parasol Unit in the idea that maybe I was going to introduce some young talent, which I didn't want to do, and I gave something completely different, which was this show about abstraction, which was unexpected, in which you had work of Schefferay, which nobody really knew.
Yes, until recently.
Yeah, and so to Gaston Bertrand and Guy Mees, I mean, all these people that is actually great. When, like, for example, Guy Mees and Blinky Palermo,
voilà,
you could make a link there, for example, which
also
is
Van Snick.
interesting. One should really honor the guy's work a little bit more. So in that sense, that was the idea, and that was also kind of a shock in London, because of course they all don't know that.
Yes.
Although Gaston Bertrand lived in London and worked from there. But I'm not an abstract artist, but I have a fascination with abstraction. I mean, I'm a huge fan, and always was a huge fan of Piet Mondriaan. But I also, of course, like the black paintings of Ed Reinhardt.
Of course.
I like Rothko a lot. Like all these, or Elspeth Kelly, or Ryman, like those people. But I don't make that kind of work. But there is this link with the idea of restraint in the image, which I find kind of interesting.
I'm trying to go back to your refusal to recreate ENDE, or to make it into an object, to give up the ephemeral quality.
Well, the thing with ENDE was that it was so stupid that I thought it was great. That's basically the idea.
Yes, good works.
Because
bad
sometimes the most stupidest idea is the best idea. And it's very straightforward. It's just this emptiness of this strange shop, because it's also a strange space, you know what I mean? And
but you insisted on the ephemerality of it, and somehow
I insisted on the ephemerality. Like, well, most of the things you see behind in the loop are also ephemeral, because I made about 80 wall paintings, which were made sometimes out of pragmatic situations that the curator couldn't afford transport or and things like that, and then it just was painted and overpainted afterwards. Like the ones in the Louvre, that's a different project, will also be overpainted the 26th of May. There are some that remained fixed, the ones in Dresden, which I gave to that's the theater in Dresden, because and the two images are from 1913, actually from the first color film images of flowers and peaches by Technicolor.
Yes.
And since it was the 100-year birthday of that theater, and I was co-curating the Erschütterung der Sinne with Ory Dessau in the Albertinium, I did that, and then also
MSK.
made a real fresco in Ghent, which is still
Yes,
there.
in
But
MSK
that's a real-
also referring to cinema somehow because of the sequence of the 3 frames.
Yeah, that's based upon film image of an older work, which is called the Arena.
Exactly.
And then the one in Bruges I gave because as a present, because the people that worked on me with the reality of the lowest rank were so fantastic that I had to re-see my whole idea of Brugge, because of being Antwerp and very arrogant, of course. And I had to admit that these people were great. And so that's why there's one in the Jan Fabers, and then there's one also that's in the Atheneum, which is the first non-religious school in Belgium made by Bonaparte.
The Atheneum is the Munich painting.
That's a Munich painting, yeah.
Can you tell something about it? Because
It was actually the Karen, the woman, the director, who is the director of the Atheneum, actually asked me because they restored, this was the festival, and the day it was completely restored overnight because of a sort of product that was in the space. It just burned, and the whole thing burned completely. And instead of restoring it completely, they kept it burned like it is now. And only, so everything was destroyed except one painting that was in restoration, called the Fame, and then she asked me to make a joint painting on the other side. And so, yeah, that's how that came.
And what you see, in fact, is some kind of a parade.
It's
masquerade.
an image, it's an image of uncertainty in a sense. And it's based upon the figure in the parade, actually during Carnival in front of the Haus der Kunst in Munich in the 30s or something like that. And then, of course, only blown up. But it also has this element of Orientalism in it. It's also a school with nearly 160 nationalities or something like that. So it's quite a specific school in a sense. So it's also there where a lot of people like Paul van Ostaaij went to school there. You have Willem Elschot, who was there, it's my favorite Belgian writer. So there is this whole history behind it.
Together with the history of what you depict in the painting, which is a parade outside the Haus der Kunst, if I remember correctly. If you want to speak about it, if not.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a specific word because we pinpointed something, but I just cannot. It's especially the idea of doubt that is propelled in this painting.
Before we go into more details, I was going through previous interviews and conversations with you. I also tried to recollect conversations we had, and I remember you saying that with regard to artists you follow, with artists you appreciate, that you find that they position themselves. And I was trying to think, what do you mean by position oneself? And then I was saying to myself that when an artist positions himself, it means that his work can also be an account of his position in the world, his position in history.
Something like that.
Yeah. And you always mention, you mention Rubens, Goya as people who position themselves, Richter as somebody who positions himself. Do you want to? I think it's also very, very important because.
But I mean, making art is one thing, but making an artwork that's relevant is another thing. So I think it's always important that the artwork has a specific relevance, which is a part of the engagement of the artist, and also an element of responsibility, so to speak. And it also should be genuine. I mean, so you could that's the most important thing. And I think that position is primarily important for me because otherwise I can actually not see it.
Maybe we go through more paintings, and then I ask you specific questions about.
But you can't stop it because it's in a
Yes.
book.
Okay. So I will not even try. This is where? Sorry.
This was a project by I think, was it Clara? I don't know. It's for television, and then they asked me to paint something on the wall overnight, and then they measured how many people would look at it, actually.
And before that we saw people meter. Before that we saw Wonderland in Haus der Kunst in your show in 2000.
Yeah, that was made with chalk. So first painted the wall black and then chalk. And it's important because it was made on the wall where you have the only door that is in terms of configuration, not correct with the building. Okay. And it gives to the Goldene Salon, which is the cafeteria, yes, and the Englische Garten.
And Wonderland.
And it's also because Hitler was fascinated with Walt Disney, in a sense.
Yes,
and
vice versa.
In the end, I mean, he was looking at Disney films without the sound, as also the Wochenshows. And the day of the opening, we found we found out that some drawings that he made of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were auctioned off, so we got some facsimiles of these drawings to put in this.
I think Walt Disney was also fascinated. Well, Disney was fascinated by Hitler as well. It worked both ways, if I know enough. In the Concertgebouw in Bruges, you show Angel, also based on an earlier painting by you. Yeah. But also it has this kind of resonance of the entrance of this corridor that is, if it's like a corridor, the entrance to the pyramids or the Egyptian tomb. So it has this.
Yeah, but this was based upon a figure that my mother always used under the Christmas tree, and it's actually a standing angel, but I just pushed it down so that it's sitting and the face is in the shadow, so it takes away the religious aspect and becomes more profane in that sense.
Yes, more pop.
And I thought it was interesting for Bruges because, yeah.
Yeah, and also the resonance.
Angels and Bruges.
This is from a Brazilian soap opera, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but that was made in Indonesia for the biennial in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and that was made in
And maybe it's the opportunity. Here we see the works from the Louvre, situated in this.
Yeah, in the Louvre. First of all, I wanted to make actually the more abstract. So like the trees that are linked, but then they had a problem with it, and so then I made one compromise to paint an image to pierce it, and that was based upon a small painting that I actually showed. It's, I think, Frank's first show, and which is about this size. And we lost that painting and never found it back. And it's the head of the back of the head of a doll made by Käthe Grüsse. So I then enlarged it on 4.5 meters, and the others are related to the idea of a New Zealand painter who was cleaning his palette. And there's 2 paintings of that I showed at the show at David Swerve in Paris. And wait a minute, sorry. Yeah, in Paris, and then, but then there was all this other footage, and the first idea was to create that. But then I made this situation because they wanted to have a link with the Louvre, and I didn't want to make anything about the Louvre because I thought that was stupid. But in a sense, the idea also had this element of a surgical thing because you have the red spots on the apron, and of course it's also a deduction of the idea of painting.
Of course.
And then the head, which was cut off at the neck, also in the real painting, has a reminiscence to the fact that. That at the same time when the guillotine became actually operational, the Louvre became a public space. So that was the link then.
But the location of it within the Louvre?
The location is particular because it's between the Flemish school and the French school. Right behind you have Poussin, and this was the. Yeah, this was the Rotonde de Valentin, which is a sort of Renaissance, a Baroque painter, which they then took the works away. And I liked it because it's an octagonal space, so it's really a space. So you have to walk through it. At the same time, it's transitional, and it's also in the more quiet part, not so close to the Joconde of Leonardo da Vinci.
And so you chose
I chose that specific space. Yeah.
So this is part of the site-specific gesture of the whole ensemble.
Yeah, because I mean it's such a megalomaniac institution, so you have to make the right choice in a sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in a previous preliminary conversation, you talked about how, you think in terms of public responsibility when you do works that are, in a public space, that are, within an architecture, and it's not a picture that you can move from one place to the other. Can you?
Yeah, well, the biggest example of that is probably the mosaic in front of the museum in the Mass.
Yes.
And I picked that particular image because I thought they were never going to do it, but then of course they do it. And then we had to get people from. Eventually we worked with Portuguese people to get it done. The whole, because the granite stone had to come from all over the world to make that. And it also was a very, direct link to the city because it's a city museum.
Yes.
And it relates to this plaquette, commemorative plaquette of Quinta Matsaisu. There is this myth that he actually committed suicide by jumping from the highest point of the cathedral. If that's true or not, I don't know. But eventually that made that he was not, suicide was not allowed, so he was not buried inside of the cathedral. If that's a real story, I don't know. It's a mythological situation. But anyway, that was the sheer link.
And maybe another, maybe not a wall work, but a floor work that you did in La Pelle in 2017.
That was another mosaic. No, because I saw the show of Damien Hirst there, which most people hated. I didn't. I thought, especially the show in the Palazzo Grazi was pretty impressive and interesting in a sense. So, and I wanted to do the opposite of that type of monumentality, to create something that, as it looks, that it's been there forever in a sense, but it hasn't, and create the sort of inversion of that monumentality. And then, of course, it was very meaningful because the image has its repercussions.
Yes, Schwarzheide.
Yeah.
This is from a show we did together. Yes, we did it with Zlatko Kopilar. You took the numbers, the installation shots from the show in 2020 in at ZenoX, and you
use that wallpaper
as a wallpaper from different angles to create some kind of distortion of space. Actually, it's a very mysterious work for me, though I was the curator of the show, and I was trying to think what exactly did you do. So, in a way, you turned the exhibition itself into a memory, or into a nightmare, or into...
Yes, it's a bit like Dr. Caligari, because we get this sort of expressionist sort of angles in situation. And it is also, it was in Eastern Europe, so it's appropriate.
It was in Vilnius,
close to the war zone.
Yes, but the numbers, nevertheless, are central to your recent thinking and your recent production, because I remember in an interview we did, the numbers came to you, you started to conceive them in the context of the pandemic. So for
it was actually that somebody from Art Forum made a phone call with me and asked me if I would be interested, that was during the pandemic, to make a drawing of the virus, which I also thought was not interesting. And I thought, no, because this thing is kind of a global thing, so you need like a global type of imagery, which should be in between abstraction and not, and that's why I came up with the idea of adding or subtracting, which is the idea of numbers and uneven numbers, which then eventually resulted in first the drawings and watercolors and gouaches, and then eventually a whole show.
Yes, and somehow created a scenario, an experience of.
And the show at Frank's was really great because it was during the pandemic, so people could only enter in small groups. So it was very, very powerful in a sense, and some people hated it, and other people were blown away with it. It was very sort of divided reactions to it.
Yes.
But it's actually a very corporal thing. I mean, because if you encounter the paintings themselves, because the inner work of the numbers is of course worked, and they're nearly of the size of a small child, so they become very sculptural in a sense.
But again, the cinematic connotation.
No, they come straight from my cinematographic work, because I used them as sections, and then I just had these numbers from a calendar, a tear of calendar that I torn out, and then they were white, and I painted them white and put them on a little thing, and then filmed them as intersections.
Yes. So, and then creating some kind of a countdown. Though we were in the climax of an event, you nevertheless thought that we are in a countdown to another event, which
war, for example.
The war in Ukraine. So you, somehow I remember from interviews, but also from conversations with us, that you had this premonition or intuition.
I think after every pandemic there is a sort of negative backlash, and so my first assessment of the situation was that there would be something like a war.
Yes, it ain't over till it's over.
Which happened.
Yes. And maybe we mention a few more. This is the arena, of course, in MSK Ghent.
Yeah, that was special because that was the first time I did a real fresco, because the other ones are painted in acrylic, and the one in the Louvre is a specific paint because they cannot cleanse the wall, because then the dust will go into the
I think it's so beautiful system. Also the curved wall in the arena gives it this movement.
I still think I need one more image to conclude it, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. But that was really exciting, because it was like you had 8 hours to do that. So,
yes.
So it was done in 3 days, and I was very afraid because I never did it before, but always fascinated by it. And it went actually extremely well, to be honest, because I was afraid that you would make an indentation in the wet plaster, but you can actually work pretty decisively, like in the watercolor fashion on it. It's very subtle, and of course we prepared it extremely well. So.
Yes, and it's based on a painting from.
It's 78. Based on 3 paintings that are in itself based upon another work which is from 1978, which is called the Arena.
I think about some kind of mass slaughter there, but it's very unclear.
No, it's an intuitive combination between. I mean, the primordial work is a mixed media work, so it's actually partially painted, partially collage, and the images are from both people from 1942, and the image that sort of depicts the space is based upon the idea of a Greek arena, is the idea of the perception of violence in a sense, and then spectacle. I put a calc screen in front of it, so it became diffused, and it made this sort of reminiscence towards a film image.
That's the earliest
that was the earliest one in the Par in Antwerp.
Yes.
And this is the shadows in Watteau, because I got that idea because they do this show in Watteau with poetry and art. And at noon I was driving in the car with Tatsi, who was a curator, I suppose. And then I got this idea to make High Noon with this sort of shadows. Painted all the way up into the last house of the village, where I painted something on the wall.
Beautiful.
On actually, I think on wallpaper. Actually, Jan Hood steamed it off and got it into the museum without me knowing it. But anyway, so that was called High Noon, because I also thought it was kind of stupid to do things in the village and shit like that. So that's where it came from.
And the bird?
This was the first show in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Vladivostok. And I don't think it exists anymore. But so 6 Belgian artists went there, and we actually opened the first Museum of Contemporary Art in Vladivostok. And of course, there was not a lot of money. And so traveled there and painted these things on the wall.
Yes.
And I think Dirk Braakman was in the show, and even the Kerkhoff was in the show, Guillaume Buy was in the show, Panamarenko was in the show. But Guillaume and Panamarenko didn't go, and I went and then did that thing there.
Of course, many of the images circulate throughout your work in a different form all the time.
Yeah, and also things are being reused. And here specifically, this was important because this is Mesnervik is actually one of the brown exhibition spaces that was designed by Mesnervik, who was actually one of the main sculptors in Croatia, and built this building actually as an art center, and it was then actually not used as such.
I remember.
And the first time that was really used for this purpose that he intended it for was when I did the show there, because during the Second World War it became a mosque, and after the Second World War it became the Pavilion of the Revolution, of course. And then, so the grandson of Mesnervik came from the States for this opening. And the plates have to do with Croatia, because that's the plates that I eat from, which we bought in a thrift shop, and there was a huge industry of porcelain industry during the communist era there, and therefore these plates.
So it's a childhood memory, somehow.
Yeah, but also the idea that these plates become something ornamental, become something strange. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
Not really. I mean, no. But I think the one thing which is the beauty of the difference for me to work on a wall, for example, or in my studio, is that when I'm doing these things that are public, I don't have a problem when people are looking at it. Mm-hmm. The strange thing is when I'm working in my studio, I can't have it. It's very strange. It's a very strange way how you accommodate things.
That's a fundamental difference.
That's a fundamental difference, yeah. Wow. The intimacy is different. So...
it's like a shared house. The wall becomes a shared building.
Yeah, because with these ephemeral works, you also work into a temporary zone, which I think is quite interesting, and it also shows that you can do with painting whatever you want. You can make it as big as you want. You're not reliable. Well, here we were relying on prints, but you can actually...
Yes.
The painting, the medium is very versatile when it comes to that.
And of course, for me, it's also one of the ways you incorporate the considerations of the conceptual minimal artists that also were very interested in this, in ephemeral wall paintings, people like Solowit, but also people like Palermo, of course.
Yeah, that's one of the links. Yeah. But that's also one of the beauties of this. And as I said, this idea of evaporating, the idea of shadow, the idea of light,
which anyway exists
the sort of ingraspability of things, and then of course the idea of memory once it's gone, which is kind of interesting, I think. Which
anyway, plays a role in your work in general, in your total oeuvre. The idea of the
and also it's when I travel, I actually never photograph that much. I mean, I take some pictures with my iPhone now. But I didn't used to do that because it would distort my memory of my travel.
Yes.
So.
Yes, pictures are deceiving, as we know. Yes. But also the memory is deceiving. Yeah. If okay, I would address our guests in case of questions,
absolutely.
Remarks. Mm-hmm. It's a unique opportunity, so you have 2 minutes. Anyway, I'm extremely excited from this, and I'm extremely excited to have this opportunity to show your work within the context.
Thank you for the show.
Within this context, thank you for your collaboration and support. And thanks and thank you. Sorry, you were slow. Yeah.
Not much. I mean, I think I think it's interesting that once you, I don't have this fetishist element with my work. I mean, I gave some works to my wife, but we don't hang anything of myself in the house, for example. And to see my work in like a group show like this, or in an institution like a museum, it's great. To see it with collectors can be rather painful. So whenever I see it as a collector and it's in the dining room, I will for sure put my back to it and look at somebody else's work, because I keep seeing mistakes. So in an intimate space where people live with the work, it is a problem. So overpainting it is great, it's fine.
So in a way, even when it's always public somehow. It's always public for you. The context is always the gallery as a public. Yeah.
The best context is public, where more than one person can actually see it.
And nobody owns it.
In a personal situation, you have this. Yeah, it's for me. It's always kind of uncanny in a way. Although, of course, I respect collectors because they collect my work, and I respect their passion. But and Carl and I, we also collect the work of other artists. But to live with my own work, is just horror.
So you feel good when it's painted over.
Then at least it's gone.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Good.